Welcome to Legal 123s with ByrdAdatto. Legal issues simplified through real client stories and real-world experiences. Creating simplicity in 3, 2, 1.
And welcome back to another episode of the Legal 123s with ByrdAdatto. I'm your host, ByrdAdatto, with my co-host, Michael Birdman Bird.
Thanks, Brad. As a business and healthcare firm, we meet a lot of interesting people and learn their amazing stories. And today's no different. In today's episode, we're going to talk with our friend, Ryan Parrott, a.k.a. the Birdman. Regrettably, Birdman and I are not related. Ryan is Birdman with an I, and I'm Birdman with a Y.
Now, Michael, as you know, our good friend Birdman served in the military, and thank you for your service, sir.
Thank you.
And as such, he served as a Navy SEAL. And for those who do not keep up with the military, I have a quiz for you, Michael. Do you know how many active duty personnel are currently serving in our country?
Well, Brad, as a faculty member for ByrdAdatto University, it does come with privileges. And I have my own research assistant. Her name is Siri.
I'm curious if your research assistant, Siri, gets the same answer that my research assistant, Alexa, got for me.
Well, let's see. Siri got less than 0.5% of the U.S. population.
That is correct. As of July of 2020, the U.S. military has 1.3 million active duty personnel. My next question, of the 1.3 million active duty personnel, how many serve in the Navy?
Well, my research assistant is moving slow, so I'm going to guess around 300,000.
Pretty close, very close. As of July of 2020, a little over 327,000 are in the Navy. So let's dive deeper, pun intended. Of the 327,000 Navy personnel, how many qualify to attend BUD/S each year?
Well, Brad, we've hit our first vocabulary word for the day. For our audience that does not follow the military jargon, Navy SEALs must attend and graduate from a 24-week A school known as Basic Underwater Demolition, SEAL, BUD/S. And the second vocabulary word is, for those who don't know what SEAL stands for, I think all of us have heard of the word Navy SEAL. It stands for Navy Sea, Air, Land Teams.
Perfect. Now, thanks for the clarification for our audience. I think those are important words to know because as we progress, these are things they should know. Of the 327,000 Navy personnel, how many qualify to attend BUD/S each year?
Well, my research assistant coincidentally is cooperating now that my internet's working better. So the answer is 1,000.
Correct. And I assume Siri helped with that. So because that she helped, of the 1,000, only 1 in 4 will actually graduate to call themselves SEALs, making the SEALs an exclusive special operations group with little over 1,300 active military members. So final question to you, Michael. How many SEALs have been on our podcast to date?
Well, so, Brad, I'm not going to count you, even though you try to claim that you're a SEAL.
No.
But and if we don't count Ryan, who's with us today, the answer is 0.
That is correct.
Let me introduce Ryan a little more formally, and let's get him on so we can hear his story. So Ryan's is a friend of ours. He's a client. Ryan is originally from Detroit, Michigan. He lives in Dallas now. He served 8 years as a U.S. Navy SEAL. He was with SEAL Team 7. He's the founder of 2 nonprofits, Sons of the Flag and Bird's Eye View Project. And ByrdAdatto has been connected and helped with both of those nonprofits. They're awesome organizations, and we'll hear a little bit more about those from Ryan himself. Ryan and his wife Lotta have 2 incredibly active boys, and when he's not running after his boys, he's and managing his 2 nonprofits. In his free time, he likes to base jump and skydive, and he's even convinced Brad to jump out of an airplane. Ryan, welcome.
Thank you for having me.
Well, Ryan, we're very excited again to have you here today. And, you know, I've had the pleasure, and Michael have had the pleasure of hearing your journey over the years. And it's a very powerful story, and we'd love for you to share with our audience what made you want to join the military.
Absolutely. You know, it started for me in I guess I always say it started for me in high school. That's really where my life would change, but it started way back before that. I grew up in Detroit, and parents were divorced by 5 years old. And they were the great parents. They continued to parent me and together. They just did not work themselves. And so I'm very blessed in that respect, where I do come from what you call a broken home. However, both of my parents still worked their butts off to make sure that I had what I needed and was provided for. But that made it difficult for me in life, because I would move from parents' house to parents' house. Things would change, had to move. And so it would be very difficult for me to make friends, and it would be very difficult for me to understand studies, because I'd go from one curriculum to the next. And so I would find myself failing multiple subjects in school without any friends, and having to live with inside my head, basically just talking to myself and, trying to interact with toys that I had versus people. So I think it slowed me in a way in that area, both those areas, which is why overall today I collect people. I really do collect people. I love my relationships. They are everything to me, and I'm grateful that I have so many relationships now. In high school, I was failing just about every subject in school, and there was a teacher who was a Marine in Vietnam who only talked about Marine Corps. So obviously I had a grandfather who served in World War II in the Navy, one in World War II in the Army. So I knew a taste of military from their perspective, but no force, nothing was forced upon. And then Marine Corps, because of my teacher, who was just the most boisterous, obnoxious person who would just run around the room every day screaming with the American flag like the whole room's on fire. Well, that's ultimately, one day, instead of being the typical charismatic guy that he was, he just stood before us with an American flag and said, "Ladies and gentlemen, there's only one thing better than the Marine Corps, and that's the U.S. Navy SEALs." I'd never heard about the SEALs before. Nobody was talking about the SEALs back then. And I listened to him. And, of course, he made it sound like SEALs live on the moon and they breathe water and they do all this crazy stuff, which I assure you we do, all of it. It's true. So join. But ultimately, I was so riveted by this information that I said, I'm going to talk to him after class. And I did. And he laughed at me. He's like, "You want to do what?" And I said, "I want to be a SEAL." And he said, "Dude, you're not even passing my class, and it's an elective. How are you going to make it through the toughest school that the military has to provide?" And, of course, just looking at him, all 120 pounds, 5'8", and like, I had no good answer for it. But he kept his word, and that's why I enjoy educators and why it's so important that educators do the right thing, continually keep their word, because the next day I showed up to class and there was a Reader's Digest magazine sitting on my desk. It talks about the making of an American warrior, a guy named Jeff Wright, who was a Marine, who got out, went into the Navy to be a SEAL. And that told me everything I needed to know in that 7 pages of, what I was in for. I mean, enough of it anyway. I was so riveted. So at that point, I went back to being a screw-up, failing every subject in school. And I was sitting in class, and the teacher ran over to the TV, turned it on, and you see a building on fire. And then all of a sudden, as we're watching the newscast, the second building gets hit by a plane. And then the newscaster says, this is definitely a terrorist attack. And right then and there, I got up. I left school. I skipped, and I went right to the recruiter station. I said, "Hey, man, whatever it takes, I want to get into the Navy. I want to try to be a SEAL. Sign me up." So that's the journey where it all started. It would take me a couple months to actually enlist because I was too young, and then I would have to fulfill my obligations to graduate in order to become a Navy sailor. But I got my dream of joining the Navy and then being selected for U.S. Navy SEAL training in 2002.
It's amazing. And all of us that were kind of old enough at when 9/11 hit can relate. We all remember exactly where we were and kind of the emotions that came up that day. In fact, Brad, I feel like you were even looking at seeing if there was a way to join, and you were too old at that point, weren't you?
Well, it was that, and I just bought a house and married, and I sat down, and my family were in the military, and I sat back and spent about a week or two thinking about trying to figure out how to enlist. I was a practicing lawyer at the time, so I didn't know what that meant, but it was, right, wrong, or indifferent, I didn't do it, but it was this, I had the same reaction I think Ryan had. I think a lot of people had, which was, this ain't right, and what can I do to help? That's
the most fascinating thing is that, when I showed up to the recruiter station, I wasn't the only one there. And that just gives you a real taste of what America and the pride we have is, that there are so many people that, I'm sure every recruiting station in the country was as full as the one I went to. So that makes me super proud to live in this country and know that we have people that are willing to do that.
It's amazing. Well, so we gave a bunch of statistics at the beginning that our quote research assistants helped us find, but you lived it. I mean, talk about the process of going from being in the Navy to becoming a Navy SEAL, and is it as grueling as it is made out to be when we read stories about it?
No, see, what most people don't understand is that there's an online class, so you can actually sign up and you can actually just type. You get a little carpal tunnel doing it, but you get your grad certificate, print it out, put it on the wall. It's great. It's a game changer, and it's definitely an eye opener. When I showed up, the story I usually tell is, you get a taste of it by reading books, and you can kind of grasp it. Now, today, there's so much content out on it that you really feel like you're already a part of it before you show up. So all I knew is that was in San Diego on Coronado Island, and I'd seen some of the pictures of old school training. So I started to get myself into the mindset as we're traveling over the Coronado Bridge. It was Wednesday night. It was dark. There was just lights on the bridge. You see the murky, dark ocean in the bay, the water, and you're like, wow, that's stuff we're going to go in. And we're cruising over the bridge, and then we drive around to the Silver Strand, and then sure enough, there's the BUD/S compound, or the SEAL compound, and it's nothing to look at because it's a training group. It's a training compound. It is not something for dog and pony shows or, the public to go enjoy the fanfare. It is purely for operational, work. So we get on. It's dark. You don't see everything. We cruise around over to the headquarters, or the quarterdeck, they call it. And then we walk through the quarterdeck, and then there's 3 pictures on the wall, and it was over 3 Medal of Honor recipients at the time. And so we're looking at those, and they're like, wow, that's something to show. Like, there's warriors. Holy cow. Okay. And we move through that onto the grinder. And when you get onto the grinder, you initially can smell the ocean. You can hear it roar. You can feel the chill in the air. You're already cold and you're dry. And then all of a sudden you smell these guys before you see them. And they come running right past you, one after the other. And they have this 1,000-yard stare. And we get word that it's Hell Week. And so this class that's going through is in Wednesday night of Hell Week, the hump day at the night portion of Hell Week, which is the worst time of Hell Week, is every night. But now they're at Wednesday. So I don't know what they've seen. I've never been through anything they've been through. They're sandy. They're soaking wet. They're freezing. They're shivering. They've got blood because the sand has rubbed their skin raw. I mean, they're fatigued. They're physically, mentally, spiritually. They are fatigued. What have they gone through? And so I'm standing there, and I'm shaking, and I'm dry. And I can't imagine what they're going through. And then they run past me. Nobody looks at us. And then all of a sudden, the last guy on the train turns around and looks at me directly eye to eye, and then sticks his tongue out like, yeah, brother, having a good time. And I thought to myself, wow, he's still alive. That's cool, and I'm home. This is where I belong, because I get that weird humor. You find humor in chaos, and that's what makes you persevere. So from that point on, we classed up. We started our training. We did a 5-week indoctrination course, which is to get you physically prepped to start day 1 of SEAL training. So you can get wet, but you don't get sandy. You go through the rigmaroles of doing swims and runs and O courses and just getting yourself into the rigmarole of the day-to-day, because it's not the evolution that kills you. It's the day-to-day, the grind, the constant grind of evolution back to evolution, just back to back to back every day, starting at 4 a.m., 4:30 a.m., going till 7, 8 o'clock at night every single day, constantly straining your body. And if you've done a workout before, go do biceps today and then hammer those biceps, and then tomorrow go do biceps again, and then next day go do biceps again, and tell me what it feels like at the end of the week. And that's exactly what SEAL training is. So you step away from the physical side because it will destroy anybody. If you took Lance Armstrong and put him into SEAL training, it would crush him. It crushes everybody. It's designed to do that. So then you have to tap into your gas tank, into the brain. And then you got to start living within your head and start playing games with yourself to say, okay, I just got to get through this evolution. So I got to make it 100 feet to that point right there, or we just got to knock this evolution out. That's what I'm focused on right now, and just biting off little pieces at a time instead of thinking about the end result, because that's what makes guys go away too quickly. So you start up day 1, and once you start after the 5-week indoctrination, day 1 it's fun, because you're fully immersed in it. You're actually in SEAL training. You're getting your butt kicked. Don't get me wrong. It sucks. You're just hammering down on yourself. But there's so much adrenaline, and you've worked so hard to get there, and everything's aligned for you to be there. So the first day you give it hell, right? You just give it everything you got. And at the end of the day, you're like, whoa, that was super cool. Hey, I made it through my first day of SEAL training. I'm a rock star, right? Little do you know, you've got years to go before you actually become a SEAL. And so, but that's the thing. It's those little moments that you have to, just hold true to, really embrace, that will help you get through and enjoying that. And that's what we say to everybody, right? Whether it's work or it's religion or it's life, it's family. Enjoy those little moments. Those are truly what become the big moments in your life when you reflect. So those are important. And that's
amazing. It makes me actually lean towards the online version you mentioned at the beginning.
Well, the first tool to do that is you have to go enlist with a recruiter. So I'll send you there and you can start.
Okay. So, I know this next part, this is a big part of your story is in 2005 when you were deployed in Iraq. Talk to us about what happened and, how it changed your life.
Certainly. Well, following up, so SEAL training is 6 months, followed by another 6 months called SQT, or SEAL Qualification Training. And then you do a few other things before you actually get to your SEAL team. Once you're on the team, then you have another 18 months of workup before you actually see war. So it's quite a bit of training just to make you a good operator. And we're grateful that for our taxpayer dollars to be able to do that because it does make us an exceptional fighters. Once you join your SEAL team, you have an 18-month workup, and you're just learning everything about what it's like to be a team guy, but you're a new guy. So ultimately, I would go through the process that every SEAL in my platoon went through, so I would be qualified to deploy to war, but you still have to earn the respect of the brotherhood in order to actually deploy and do your job. When you get overseas on your first deployment, there's inherently some arrogance in each guy. And I think it's for two reasons. Now, I'm speaking clearly from my own perspective, but the two reasons, I think one is you have to be arrogant internally to do what we do because you're going up against enemies they're superior enemies within the terrorist networks. We're going after top value targets, and that's going to be a dangerous mission. There's potentially going to be a lot of bad guys around with guns ready to go. And so you have to mentally say, nothing's going to defeat me. I am awesome. I'm gonna go in there and I'm gonna do everything, and we're gonna make it. So there's arrogance there just to do the job because it's lethal. The other part of it is there's an arrogance because you are now on a SEAL team and you're getting ready to deploy to go fight. You're elite, and so you have this inherent arrogance. It's like when you become good at anything, do you immediately check yourself and say, okay, I know I'm getting good at this, so maybe revert to the basics again, or do I just enjoy the fact that I'm getting good at it and then start to utilize that in a bad manner? And I think for me, I did. I ended up really believing that I was something special. And, I think that, you just have to humble yourself. So you get overseas, we're operating. As a new guy, you don't do a whole lot. You're basically keeping your mouth shut. You're just trying not to mess up and do the job to the best of your ability and watch the guys that have done this already 1,000 times over. Study, analyze, and become like them. Just mimic them. It was 3 months into deployment. We were coming back from an operation on Route Michigan, which I think that's a funny joke in itself, right? I'm from Michigan. We're driving down Route Michigan. It's the most dangerous road in Iraq. And about 3 kilometers, so we call it 3 clicks, south of our base, we hit a roadside bomb. And it was the scariest, most violent thing that I have ever felt in my life. It's hard to describe because it's so much emotion and so much that happens within a split second. And for those that actually stay, cognizant of what's happening like I did, it's very real. It's very serious. And so it basically blew me straight up out of the turret into the sky. And we like to make a running joke that, oh, yeah, Birdman went flying like 2,000, 3,000 feet. Not even close. I think I got ejected up onto the top of the vehicle, and then I actually rolled off. I would sustain burns to my face and hands. Shrapnel was spit through the car at a crazy volume, and it injured everybody in the vehicle a lot worse than I did. I was very fortunate. But then again, you see your teammates laying on the ground and they're suffering. You have to go render aid, and so that's exactly what our platoon did. And we worked really well together as a cohesive unit. It was about 22 minutes from the time that we were blown up to the time that everybody else was under the knife getting surgery, and everybody lived. So overall, a success to make it happen. That's one of the casualties of war that, you can't see. That's the worst enemy right there, because we'll fight anybody any day of the week. But when it comes to an IED, you have no idea where it's at. So It's basically a chicken shit way of fighting, excuse my language. But anyway, we'll do it because it's all about keeping America safe. So, that's how I get the nickname, because you never get a nickname for being a stud unless you are absolutely a stud, and I am no stud. So I got Birdman because I went flying.
So I'm going to pivot here a little bit. So you went flying, and that's hence the Birdman. But, what made you then, after serving, start a nonprofit?
Never thought I would. Never, ever thought about it. In fact, I used to go to the Navy SEAL Foundation when they started their organization out. And, you donate a little bit here and there and didn't require anything in return. We didn't want auction items or that. It was just like, I'm going to give a little bit of money back because I know that some guys need it, their families need it. And just that was the extent of my understanding of nonprofit. So I get out in 2010. I did 8 years, and I moved to Dallas, Texas. I was going to take a job in concrete, which ended up falling through. The company was down considerably, and they were not hiring, they were firing. So I found myself in a bad position where, I was here in Dallas. I didn't know anybody. I didn't have a job, and that's a pretty bad place to be. On top of the fact that I had just given up a career that I could have stayed 30 years on that was just an exceptional, probably the best job in the world. I felt like I had accomplished what I wanted to when I was in the service. I was pretty proud of the work we did, and I was good. So anyway, I was struggling out here. I had no meaning and purpose. I had no mission, and that's what I think everybody struggles with when you look at your day-to-day life. It doesn't matter how much work you have or the stressors that are coming in. If you don't have a mission set that's bigger than yourself, you are constantly going to stress over where is it. You're going to constantly look for that that gratification. And the easiest way to do that is to plug in with something that is grander than yourself, an organization, a charity. And I always say this to people: if you're not involved with any organization, any type of organization, like get involved in one of them. There are so many out there, and we have to do our part as Americans to support people with diseases, people with ailments, people with injuries. We all have to do our part. It's not just to be an American to sit here on this land and take from it. We have to give back to it. And so find an organization that relates to you out there in this country and join it as a volunteer at a minimum and help them once a year. Help them build their mission to be a bigger success so they can treat more people.
Totally agree.
So honestly had no clue. And I was sitting in a boardroom with a bunch of veterans, and we were joking about who's the best. And naturally, I would sit there and be quiet because I already knew the answer to that. Thank you very much. And there was one particular guy who was an Army Ranger. He was a West Point graduate. He was on his first deployment to Afghanistan, and same story. He had an IED, and his IED was a lot worse than ours. His went full detonation. It killed one of his best friends, and from that point on, he was severely injured. He had disfigurement. He was burned first and second and third degree over a lot of his body, to include his face and his hands. And I'd never seen an injury like that. You see gunshot wounds, you see blast wounds, you see amputation, but burns, when you get burned initially, it doesn't look so severe. It might be purple, it might be black, but it doesn't look like what it's going to look like in the future. And then usually if you get injured, you go to a hospital. We don't see you for a long period of time, so we just get back into the fight. We rarely see you again. So it was an interesting eye-opener for me to look at that and say, well, if that happened to me, how would I deal with that? How would I deal with the fact that I looked in the mirror every day and I can't understand who I'm looking at? And I couldn't come up with an answer. So I literally went home that night, grabbed a bottle of Jack Daniels, sat at the computer, and just studied all night long. And at the end of the day, I came up short. I couldn't give him anything. There was no GoFundMe sites back then. There was nothing public knowledge to give them to say, hey, maybe we could go raise some money for you and help you get through this program. So I called him the next day and I said, hey, dude, I couldn't find anything. So if I were to start something on your behalf, would you join me? And he said, brother, I'd be honored. And that's how Sons of the Flag was born.
And so, and maybe give 2 more seconds or so on what is Sons of the Flag's mission.
Absolutely. Well, I could say it or you could say it because you probably know just as much.
They want to hear from you, Ryan. They don't want to hear from some attorney.
That's not true. I want to tell you about this attorney. He's a ninja. True story. 6'2", 240 pounds, sheer muscle. So there I was. So anyway, Sons of the Flag, we started it really to be just a home for a burn patient to park themselves at. That's the biggest concern, is that when you get burned, there's no roadmap for you at that point. What do you do next? What happens when you get out of initial care, when your life-saving treatment is over with? When you leave the hospital, where do you go? What does this look like in full totality? Is this going to be a lifelong issue or whatnot? So we always would talk with burn patients in the infancy of this and say, what are your concerns? And they said, what's next for me? And so we wanted to go out and answer that question. So we spent the first couple of years traveling to different burn units, talking to doctors, the key physicians, reconstructive surgeons, nurses, the healthcare providers, everybody, and patients to find out what this looked like. And we kept getting the same answer. The patients would always say, where do I go next? The doctors would say, we're limited because there's just not enough funding with burns. And ultimately, there's not enough people talking about it. And it's one of those injuries that will never go away. It's a severe injury that will last you a lifetime, and it is one of the most horrific, painful injuries you can endure. So after answering these questions by saying, you know what, instead of trying to find answers out there, why don't we become the answer? So then we changed ourselves to Sons of the Flag, revolutionizing burn care for all Americans. So now, if a burn patient hears about Sons of the Flag, they will realize that we are here for them. We only focus on burns, and they could go to our website to apply for anything they need related to the burn. Whether that be surgery, we have a program called Mission Reconstruct Freedom that actually sends them through surgery with our top doctors on the team that are all certified reconstructive burn surgeons. They are not plastic or general surgeons only. They've done their fellowships. They are elite, or what we call tier 1 doctors. So they could get surgery, and that's pediatric to adult, veteran, first responder, active duty military, civilian, does not matter. You wear a burn, you're part of our team. We hire doctors. This is another program, fellowship. You see, right now, most of our doctors are a lot of the good doctors are over 50 years old that have been doing this for a long time. So in the next 10 to 15 years, there's going to be a mass exodus of burn surgeons. What do we do at that point? We don't want to play catch up and try to hire 300, 400 doctors. There are only 300 accredited burn surgeons nationwide. So we hire a doctor at a minimum every single year to become a burn surgeon. So we get a young, innovative, motivated doctor that's going to have a lifelong in this career. And we're continually hiring doctors. And this year we're trying to do 2 doctors. So we're about ready to do 50% of all new burn surgeons in the United States. Our goal is to hire all of them, to be 100% accountable for them, and then add to that mix so that when the 10 to 15 years comes up, there's somewhat of a mass exodus, we won't feel that. That's our goal. But you can apply at Sons of the Flag for anything. If you're a burn survivor or a family member of a burn survivor and you guys need help because you're struggling with payments or whatever, send your application in. We'll get right on it, and we'll help you out.
You know, I'm just going to add, and obviously I'm very biased because I got to meet Ryan a long time ago and sat in a small conference room and got to hear his story. And I was hooked from day one after hearing how focused of an organization you were and how true you all been to your mission. So it's a phenomenal organization. That's why I'm so proud that to have been helping you guys throughout the years, and just to park myself next to y'all, that's a total privilege.
I'm grateful. We're absolutely grateful.
Well, I have one last question for you, and obviously you've shared a lot with us, so we're very appreciative. I know I personally could do this for 2 hours, but we always try to keep these things a little bit shorter for our audience. But tell me, when you were starting this nonprofit, or as you're running this nonprofit, for those who are thinking about starting a nonprofit, what's a big obstacle that you ran into when you started your nonprofit?
I would have answered this question every year a little differently, but I think now, having been in the nonprofit space for 8 years, I would say if you're considering starting a nonprofit, I think the first thing you should do is really join another organization that already exists to see how it works, see how it functions, and I wouldn't say like a small mom and pop shop organization. I would look at something that's already sustained and established and try to join them as a volunteer, to understand the inner workings of it, what it really takes to run one, because it's much like a license. They give you a license to drive your car at 16 years old, and then you're off to the races, right? And I would not say that a lot of kids are qualified to drive a car. They give a 90-year-old person a vehicle, and yeah, they've been driving for 100 years, but at the same time, are they really qualified? And so I was not qualified to run an organization when I got the tax-exempt status to run an organization, and that becomes a problem. And why you see most of the small charities fail is because you have no background, no backstory on how to run one. So join a different organization, something that relates to you, work with them for 6 months to a year, and ask the questions, really get yourself engulfed in how it works, so that if you intend to run your own someday, you at least have a backstop on how to run one. Don't just go into it blindly, like anything in life. Because it does make it very difficult. You're going to have to raise a lot of money. You're going to have to negotiate all kinds of stuff. You're going to have to realize who you need on the team to make this thing sustainable. And all of that has a cost associated with it. So, it's a difficult thing. I used to say that charities were, silly. I didn't think there was any, it wasn't hard, whatever. They just do fun things here and there on the weekends. And then when I got involved and started running one, I realized that it's probably the hardest job that I've ever done. It's constant, and you're not doing it for yourself. You're dealing with other people's lives here, so you have to hold that at the highest esteem and, treat it that way. So just learn the stuff you want to do. And here's the other kit and caboodle to that. As you're working in another organization, you might find that you absolutely fall in love with that organization and you just stick with their mission and continue to help them focus and grow, as opposed to opening up your own. And the last thing I'll say is, before you decide to start a charity because you initially see a gap within your circle, go and look out there in the country to make sure it doesn't already exist. We don't need to keep populating this country with different charities that all do the same mission set. Go look to make sure that it doesn't already exist. If it doesn't exist, start it up all day long. If it does exist, maybe talk to them first and get in behind them and try to help them grow their brand. That'll definitely help out America.
Awesome. Well, as always, when I talk to you, Birdman, it's both enlightening and inspiring. We're so grateful to have you on the Legal 1-2-3s with ByrdAdatto. What we'll do next is go to a break, and we'll let you go, and then Brad and I will take just a few minutes, not to try to ruin everything you just said, by talking a couple of legal pointers on nonprofits.
Yeah, I'm grateful for your time, for having me here, and for all the work that you've done for us over the years. It's, there's one thing that we were told: we needed a lawyer, we needed a CPA, and then, we need to figure out how to get some money. And I don't know where I'd be without you guys. It's just, there's a lot of stuff we don't understand. So thank you for all the work that you've done. I always tell people, there's only one person that's ever told me not to told me to do something that I actually listened to, because I'm pretty blunt and I'm like, all right, I hear you, but I'm doing it. This is just, that's how I am. And Brad actually stopped me not too long ago from doing something that, who knows what the outcome would have been, but he didn't force me, just said, let's think about that for a second. And I was like, oh, crap, here we go. And I thought about it, and I was like, yeah, he's right. All right, I'm going to just shut my mouth. So I appreciate everything, both on the legal side and then the friendship side. You guys are awesome, and I will stay with your firm forever.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you.
Many business owners use legal counsel as a last resort rather than as a proactive tool that can further their success. Why? For most, it's the fear of unknown legal costs. ByrdAdatto's Access Plus program makes it possible for you to get the ongoing legal assistance you need for one predictable monthly fee. That gives you unlimited phone and email access to the legal team, so you can receive feedback on legal concerns as they arise. Access Plus, a smarter, simpler way to access legal services. Find out more. Visit ByrdAdatto.com today.
And welcome back to Legal 1-2-3s with ByrdAdatto. I'm your host, ByrdAdatto, with my co-host, Michael Byrd. Michael, that was an amazing story to listen to what Ryan had to said. I think you summed it up right before we went to commercial best. He's so inspiring to be around. Very intense but fun-loving guy, and I think that really describes who he is from being a SEAL, that he can take something very intense but still have a lot of fun. So I was super excited to have him in the studio. But, Ryan brought up a lot of points about starting a nonprofit, and I'd love to hear your thoughts, because both of us are extremely active in working with nonprofits.
Yeah, and it's such a good reminder of how important, being reminded that there's something bigger than what we do on a day-to-day basis out there. And I know that's been, part of our, inspiration for working with nonprofits. And the less inspiring side of that is that a nonprofit is very much like a normal business. That's why lawyers have a role in it. That's why we get asked to help. And so just a few kind of thoughts, pearls of wisdom for those out there who are in a nonprofit, on a board of a nonprofit, or even thinking about doing one, is just that there is a, governance, for, using the formal word, but basically informally, meaning that there's rules that you have to follow that make a huge difference on preserving your tax exempt status, preserving your protection as a nonprofit in the state where you're formed, and really protecting the board of directors. The board of directors of a nonprofit owe a fiduciary duty to the nonprofit, and so it's it's a big deal. And then finally, to make sure you have all these rules in place also can significantly affect your ability to fundraise. The more sophisticated you get with philanthropists and organizations that give, the more they're going to do their due diligence and look at the infrastructure of a nonprofit. And so that's kind of where we help. And whether we're actually on the board or just helping, on a non-board role as attorneys with our nonprofits. I know personally I'm on a board for an organization I've been involved with for many years, and we went through that challenge of how do we go from a family founded nonprofit that was a small group of people that really got its legs and had some serious donors and serious mission work to create the governance formality. And it was a transition to create the bylaws, create the processes, but so important, though not as interesting and exciting as the actual mission work itself. It's still such an important part of making sure you have things set up correctly.
Yeah, and I agree. What I love about Ryan's story is he talks about how intentional he was about what he wanted to do and how he went through that process and educating himself. But, you can have a great intention, but execution is actually very important. And a lot of people, they'll go try to start a nonprofit and they don't realize truly starting a nonprofit to be a tax-exempt nonprofit, you really have to be very careful and meticulous about literally dotting the I's and crossing the T's, because if you're going to go out there and fundraise, you definitely want people to give money to you. And a lot of people make the mistake, they form what they believe to be a nonprofit, and they don't get their tax exemption. And that puts you back, especially when it comes to the nonprofit world. That can actually set you back for months at a time because you got to amend everything. So it's really important, if you are thinking about starting a nonprofit, to make sure you're working with counsel and CPAs who understand the importance of filing. And for those who aren't familiar, one small step to the side, the legal side, is you do have to file something with the state that you're in, and you have to file it purposeful, again, knowing that those records that you're providing to the state will then be reviewed later by the IRS to determine whether or not you should get that tax-exempt application. The one that everyone always wants to get is known as a 501c3, because those who give money to a 501c3 gets the biggest bang for their buck literally when they donate to your organization. So again, these are things that as you're starting, it sounds like we're getting in the weeds, which we are a little bit, but we want to make sure that if you are doing it, especially because of timing issues you start running into, we've unfortunately dealt with people who've gone out, try to form their own nonprofit, and then we had to go back in and fix it for them. So those are some minor steps that I'd caution the people on. But I'll tell you what, Michael, you kind of said this at the beginning is, as a firm and as the individuals we surround ourselves with, I love seeing, we love helping others succeed. And I definitely think, hearing Ryan's story and success, like I told him, I'm so privileged. I feel so privileged to be able to park ourselves next to him and see what a great work he does.
Awesome.
Thanks again for joining us today. And remember, if you like this episode, please subscribe. Make sure to give us a 5-star rating and share with your friends.
You can also sign up for the ByrdAdatto newsletter by going to our website at ByrdAdatto.com.
ByrdAdatto is providing this podcast as a public service. This podcast is for educational purposes only. This podcast does not constitute legal advice, nor does it establish an attorney-client relationship. Reference to any specific product or entity does not constitute an endorsement or recommendation by ByrdAdatto. The views expressed by guests are their own, and their appearance on the program does not imply an endorsement of them or any entity they represent. Please consult with an attorney on your legal issues.